I'll just... Hey, what's up guys? Today I'm really excited to talk to you about one of, if not my favorite characters in the game, Xiao. Xiao is a powerful Anemo DPS with very well consolidated AoE damage, who focuses on using plunge attacks inside of his burst to hit everything around him. Xiao is a character who I've been maining since he came out about like 10 months ago, and so I've invested hundreds if not thousands of hours into this character, so I have a lot of advice and useful information to give you guys to play this character efficiently. And since Xiao is getting a rerun, I feel like it's the perfect time to make an updated Xiao guide covering everything you need to know about this character regarding, as I said, how to play him, but also how to build him and build a team around him. Lastly, as always, I want you guys to know that I stream most nights on Twitch, so link in the description if you're interested. And with that being said, let's finally talk about Xiao. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do in this video is talk about Xiao's playstyle and talents, giving you the basics to play this character efficiently. Also, a bit later in the video, I'm going to be including more advanced tips regarding more intricate information around like his combos and rotations and stuff, so do stay tuned for that. But for now, let's start by talking about Xiao's playstyle. As I'm sure you know by now, Xiao is a hyper carry who focuses on dealing insane amounts of area of effect damage to everything around him without fail through his plunge attacks inside of his elemental burst. In fact, his elemental burst is the main part of his kit, as this ability will infuse your Xiao with Anemo damage, converting all of his damage into Anemo, and allow him to jump very high every single time he jumps. Because of that, you can spam plunge attacks on him, which are really good and your main way of dealing damage. In fact, as you can see, you gain an insane amount of damage through these plunge attacks. At level 10, it's 95%, but even at lower level, like this damage percent you're gaining is absolutely huge. On top of that, it lasts for 15 seconds with an 18-second cooldown, and so as you can see, there's really not much downtime here. While yes, you only want to be dealing damage or, attacking on Xiao inside of your burst, since your burst only has a 3-second cooldown effectively, that's really not much downtime since you're going to be spending it swapping characters and giving your Xiao energy so that he can use his burst again when it's up. In fact, the energy cost of his burst is 70, which is okay as long as you run an Anemo battery and a bit of energy recharge, which we'll talk about in the artifact section. Lastly, this ability, you should know, does drain your life, like you lose a bit of HP every second, but it's really not that much HP, honestly. I know some people talk about Xiao having HP issues, so it is something you need to know, but it's not really something you should be concerned with as long as you run a healer and potentially even a shield if you want to. Another thing I want to say though is regarding his plunges, as you can see there's a few different numbers here. You can in fact do either low plunges or high plunges, both of which having their situations, but high plunges are typically better for larger AoE and more damage. But you should also know that this instance of plunge damage right here, as you can see like above the low and high plunge, there's another sort of instance of damage. What this is collision, or what I call bonking, where you can in fact bonk enemies if you land on their head while you're plunging. And as you can see, there will be 2 damage numbers on screen, one from your plunge and one from the collision, the bonk of landing on their head. This is more advanced information that honestly a lot of Xiao players don't really think about, but it can be a good way to deal more damage against specific enemies, especially large ones. But I will go into more detail on this in the advanced tips section of this video. Next up, regarding your elemental skill, this is pretty straightforward. You get 2 charges, and each of which does a lot of damage and will give you 3 Anemo particles on a 10-second cooldown. What's nice about the charges is you can build them up before you get into a fight and during your burst to allow your Xiao to get a lot of energy when he needs it. Do keep in mind though that you can't gain particles when you use this ability inside of your burst, so be sure not to do that, because as you can see, while it will normally give you particles, if you use your burst and then use your skill, it will not generate any Anemo particles. And so because of this, what you typically want to do is use your skill at the start of your rotation before you use your burst, and then you use your burst instantly as the particles are flying to you, to where you start your next rotation with some energy ready, and then throughout the whole duration of your burst, you just let your skills charge back up and don't use them. Lastly, some bonus information you should know is that the damage percent you gain inside of your burst is actually increased further the longer you stay inside of it with your first passive. So while I mentioned 95% at level 10 earlier, it's actually more with this passive. On top of that, your other passive, I might as well mention, it just gives you more damage when you use like multiple skills in a row. Using one will buff the second one and the third if you have your first constellation. So this is just something you might as well know, as doing multiple E's in quick succession will increase their damage. Regarding Xiao's talent priority, it's very straightforward. For most Xiaos, if you're not C6, what you want to be doing is maxing your normal attacks first. This is your #1 priority because increasing your plunge attack damage is absolutely huge. And then after that, you can level your burst and then your skill. I do want to point out though that if you have your 6th constellation, your elemental skill becomes the most important talent to level. Now with that being said, let's talk about how to build your Xiao. In terms of your artifacts, it's actually pretty straightforward. While he doesn't have a particular artifact set that he needs, there are many really good 2 pieces that are very good for Xiao. In fact, there are 3 main ones that you should mix and match depending on your substats, as they're all pretty similar in strength with one another. Those 3 include the 2-piece Viridescent Venerer for 15% Anemo damage bonus, the 2-piece Gladiator for 18% attack, and obviously the 2-piece Reminiscence as well, that also gives you 18% attack. Now, while on first glance 18% attack doesn't seem like that much, Xiao is a character who really wants attack percent as his burst gives him so much damage, and so buffing Xiao, your hyper carry's attack, is actually very important. Also, to answer the question that I get a lot regarding this set, like the 2 pieces that give attack, like Reminiscence and Gladiator, versus the 2-piece Viridescent Venerer, which one is better really depends on your substats and also the team you're running. While there are situations where running 2 Glad, 2 Reminiscence can be more damage, if you're running attack buffing supports, external sources to buff your attack like Bennett, Thrilling Tales, Noblesse Oblige, and others that we'll talk about in the team comp section, then basically the more attack you gain, the less attack becomes necessary, to where 2 Viridescent can be better. Overall though, they're very similar in strength, so I highly recommend you mix and match the 2 pieces that have better stats on them to get the optimal Xiao. In fact, before we start talking about what artifact stats you actually want, I do want to point out that sets that buff your burst damage don't work with Xiao, as his burst doesn't snapshot. Also, regarding the 4-piece Reminiscence, I don't really want to have to talk about this in this video because it makes you lose energy for a bit of damage, which is only relevant if you can clear in 1 burst, and so it's overall not a set that I recommend on Xiao. Alright, now that we've seen that artifact stats matter more than sets, what stats are you actually looking for? Well, as with every hyper carry, it's important to give them the most damage possible to just maximize their on-field DPS. And so obviously, crit rate, crit damage, and attack percent are the main stats you're looking for. Also, since Xiao's a character who does damage inside of his burst, you want to be able to spam it on cooldown. Because of that, you want to have enough energy recharge to get your burst back as soon as it's available. That being said, the exact amount of energy recharge you need depends on your team and your rotation, but in general, you really don't need that much, and one of the biggest Xiao misconceptions, especially back during his first banner, was people thinking that Xiao needed way more energy recharge than he actually needs. In fact, as long as you run Xiao with another Anemo character, a Anemo battery that can generate energy for him like Sucrose or Venti, you really don't need that much energy recharge. And while I'll go into more detail on his teams later in the video, the exact amount of ER you need can literally vary from 100 to 140 depending on you, with around 120, 125 being the general range that I tend to recommend. Now for your main stats, what are you looking for? Well, for your sands, you clearly want attack percent, as it just increases your damage exponentially and is pretty much a must on Xiao. If you're wondering whether or not an energy recharge sands is viable, I'll honestly say no, because if you ever need more energy, you can make up for that by running more supports, more Anemo characters like Sucrose or anyone else to give you those particles, instead of sacrificing the insane amount of damage that an attack percent sands will give you. Moving on to your goblet, you actually have 2 good options, which is nice for Xiao because it can be more flexible. In fact, while an Anemo damage bonus is generally the best and what I recommend, so if you have a good Anemo damage bonus, definitely use that. If you don't have a good Anemo goblet, an attack percent goblet can actually be viable on Xiao, since as I mentioned, he really wants attack percent. The biggest thing I want to mention though is when you're running attack boosting supports, which is something that I recommend, or just other sources of attack like a Thrilling Tales user, Anemo damage bonus starts becoming better and better as you're already getting a lot of attack percent. Now lastly, for your circlet, it's very straightforward. You either want to go for a crit damage circlet or a crit rate circlet, both of them being very good, and just pick the one that helps you balance your ratio, whether you need more crit rate or more crit damage. Now moving on to Xiao's weapons, I'm gonna rank them all and give you guys an exact weapon ranking in this section as well, so that you can find the best weapon for you. I want to start by saying though that 5-star weapons for Xiao in general are all very good, so if you have one, you should typically use it, with I guess a few exceptions. In fact, the Jadewing Spear, his signature weapon, is the best one for him generally, because it has a very high base attack, gives you crit rate, and it has an effect that gives you more damage while you're in combat, so it's just a really good weapon for Xiao. The Staff of Homa is a close second and can sometimes surpass it depending on how much crit damage you need and stuff, and generally to like answer the question of Jadewing Spear versus Homa, they're both very good. Jade is more universal, but Homa is also amazing with high crit damage, a decent effect, and a good base attack. This weapon can also out DPS Jadewing Spear if you're under 50% HP, as you will gain additional attack percent, so that is something to keep in mind. The other 5-star weapons are all very good too. The new 5-star spear that was announced on their Twitter also gives you a similar amount of damage, and while this weapon may not be Xiao's best in slot, it's actually a really good option as it has a high base attack and a pretty good effect. Because of that, the new weapon banner that features both the Jade Spear and the Calamity Queller can be pretty decent for Xiao, as both options are very good and will usually be a bigger DPS upgrade than getting your C1, depending on what your alternative weapons are. Lastly, regarding the other 5-star weapons, the energy recharge ones like Skyward Spine and Engulfing Lightning, while you'll see exactly where they place in the weapon ranking later, these weapons go up or down in value depending on how much energy recharge you have in your artifacts. That being said, if you don't have 5 stars, don't worry, because Xiao does not need them. In fact, he has a really good 4-star option if you buy the battle battle pass, which is the deathmatch. While this weapon has low base attack, you can make up for it by running attack boosting supports, which will greatly increase the performance of this weapon, and it also makes up for that with the insanely high crit rate stat, 36.8% at level 90, and also a good effect that increases your attack. While deathmatch is typically your best 4-star option, the Blackcliff pole can be good too, and better in certain scenarios. In fact, regarding deathmatch versus Blackcliff, while I recommend deathmatch overall because it's universally good, you don't need to like activate the passive like you do with Blackcliff. If you're fighting small enemies, or one small enemy and then a boss enemy, something like that, where you can proc the Blackcliff's passive, it can be really good. Also, while it does cost Star Glitter, and Star Glitter can be difficult to get as a free-to-play player, Blackcliff pole is still your best free-to-play option, and so if you are a Xiao Main who is free-to-play, I highly recommend you get the Blackcliff pole or save Star Glitter to get it eventually. In fact, while other free-to-play options include White Tassel or the Blacksmith options, they really don't feel that good on Xiao compared to Blackcliff pole, so I don't recommend them. Lastly, regarding some gacha 4-stars that are pretty good, the Lithic Spear, especially with refinement and depending on your team comp, can be amazing, but this weapon wasn't featured very often, and so not that many people have it, but it is quite good with the high base attack and the amazing effect that gives you more attack and crit rate, depending on how many leeway characters are in your team. Lastly, regarding Favonius Lance, this can be good with high investment and especially with refinement, giving you more energy, making it a not bad option if you need that energy recharge and your artifact stats don't have any, but the damage this weapon gives you is not as high, obviously, as crit weapons, so I don't recommend it as much, but it is viable. Now, with that being said, I'm going to include on screen right now a weapon ranking for Xiao. Now, do keep some things in mind. Xiao's weapon ranking depends highly on your teams and the attack buffs you're gaining, because Xiao's a character who gets a lot of value from, let's say, Thrilling Tales user, a Noblesse Oblige user, a Bennett buff, and all that, so his weapon ranking can vary based on that and also your artifact stats. Also, the reason I've included two is because they're different. The weapon ranking on the left is Xiao solo with no supports that buff his attack, and the one on the right is with Xiao inside of a Bennett buff, so increased attack from your Bennett, because obviously, as I mentioned, your supports and the amount of attack percent you're gaining does change the weapon ranking. Lastly, I do want to thank Xiao Mains for doing these calcs, and I'm using their calcs because I know a lot of them and they're quite reliable as a community with a lot of very helpful Xiao resources, so I did want to give a shout out to them. Next up, regarding Xiao's constellations, it's quite straightforward. While he is a character who is not constellation dependent by any means, so you can very happily keep him at C0, I believe two of his constellations are worth discussing, notably his first one and his last one. Regarding his C1 and whether or not you should pull for it, it honestly depends. It's not a needed one by any means, and it's not as good as some other C1s on 5 stars like say Hutao's C1 or a couple of other good early game ones that give you a significant damage increase, whereas Xiao's will just give you another charge of your skill. For a DPS character, having another charge doesn't matter as much as like a support since you're spending a lot of time on field with them, so you won't have that much time to recharge all 3 charges, but it is very good mainly for your first rotation as it will give you more damage and more energy. And so that is why I chose to get it. I just find it fun and quite good, but it really isn't needed, especially compared to some other first constellations on 5-star characters, making it just pretty okay. Now, before we talk about Xiao's 6th constellation, the other ones I want to point out are really not that great. His C2, 3, and 4 are pretty bad, and his 5 is also not amazing. It just increases your burst talent level, which isn't useless, but really isn't a huge DPS increase. And so I highly recommend either staying C0 or getting C1 or getting 6 and nothing in between. For his 6th constellation, it's really good for a whale constellation, and while it's not the best for one huge number or for just, you know, a speed run in one burst, it gives you one of the highest sustained DPSs in the game because you can spam your elemental skill after using a plunge, and so it is a very good and also quite fun constellation for a 6th one if you do just have an insane amount of primo gems. Now, that being said, let's talk about some advanced Xiao tips to play this character efficiently. The first thing I want to mention is how to jump cancel your normal attacks, basically weave in a free normal attack between every plunge. The reason this works is because Xiao's normal attacks come out very fast. As you can see, you can cancel it by just jumping, and then you can jump that into a plunge when you're inside of your burst. To show you guys what I mean, I'm going to stun this rune guard, and also I took all the artifacts away from my Xiao so I don't kill him instantly, but basically while a normal plunge is just like that, you can actually get a normal attack in, then plunge, then get another normal attack in, as you saw, between every single plunge attack. You can just do a quick normal attack like that, and then that will link into a plunge by just jump canceling it and then plunging. Also, something very important to master concerns Xiao's different types of plunges. As I mentioned, there's both low plunging and high plunging, right? But the thing is, you can high plunge from variable distances. A high plunge from here will do the exact same amount of damage as a high plunge from like there, despite having not jumped the full length. Because of that, what that means in practice is you want to try to high plunge basically as soon as you can, instead of having to, like, you know, fully high plunge. It's the sort of timing that you're going to get used to between doing a low plunge instantly and doing a high plunge. There's a actually a 1 frame difference that I'll play on screen now. The height difference between a low plunge and a high plunge really isn't that big, and so it can be hard to perfectly time. You're gonna have to get used to it the more you play Xiao, although I do want to say that doing a late high plunge is fine, especially if you're still getting used to the timing and want to avoid accidentally low plunging, although there are situations where low plunging can be good too. Alright, now what does that actually mean? Well, in general, you typically want to be doing high plunges on Xiao basically as soon as you can to get the most DPS. There are some exceptions to this, however. First of all, if you can spam low plunges and your low plunges do collision impact, that bonking damage from hitting an enemy on the head, like basically landing on them, then that will be the optimal DPS by just spamming plunge as fast as you can, effectively doing 2 plunge numbers per hit. This is something that is extremely useful against, for example, ruin guards. As you can see, my speedrun of one of the old floor 12s use this mechanic to spam plunges and do 2 hits per plunge. This works on both high and low plunges and can make your Xiao deal even more single target against enemies like a Magu Kenki or ruin guards or other big enemies that this works against. And regarding your combos, something else I wanted to point out is that charge attacking can be quite useful sometimes, mainly single target, because what you can do is do a charge attack into a jump canceled plunge attack. So you jump cancel the charge attack's long animation and follow it up with a plunge attack, which can be quite nice, especially against 1 or 2 enemies. Although typically plunging will give you more AoE and will be better if you can bonk them or get that extra hit of collision damage. Other rapid fire information you should know is number 1, while I mentioned you can high plunge early, sometimes you might want to stay in it for a while to dodge an attack, which is kind of rare, but if you don't have a shield, it can be nice, especially against something like a Magu Kenki. Also, it's worth mentioning that Xiao's Anemo plunges can be very efficient at taking down shields, notably elemental shields like the Abyss Mages have, just passively as you're plunge spamming. Now what I want to do is talk about one of the most important sections of this entire video, which is Xiao's team comps. I hear a lot of misconceptions around Xiao's teams. A lot of people who struggle with energy management comes from having a bad team comp, and also a lot of people spreading rumors that Xiao is dependent on specific characters. However, I want to say that Xiao is honestly quite easy to build and has many flexible teams. In fact, the main character you need, or the main other character support you want with Xiao, is just another battery. Another Anemo unit or someone who can provide a lot of particles to him is the only essential and really needed piece in your Xiao team. After that, other than generally wanting a healer, your teams can be quite flexible. Now regarding your other Anemo character, Sucrose is typically the one that I recommend the most, and while there are others that I will cover, the reason I recommend Sucrose is because first of all, her skill gives you a nice amount of particles when you use it, and also because with her first constellation, you get an extra charge of it. On top of that, being a catalyst character is really good for her, because if you don't have your first constellation or just need more particles, you can run sacrificial fragments to give more energy to your Xiao, and if he already gets enough energy, you can also run her on Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers, which is insane for Xiao, and just this weapon itself is one of Xiao's best supports, as he is a character who really wants attack percent, and obviously this catalyst gives you 48% for 10 seconds. Other good Anemo characters though include someone like Venti, who can group up enemies for you and also give you a lot of particles on his low cooldown elemental skill. Now while yes, against small enemies who can get trapped in Venti's burst, Xiao's plunges won't be able to hit them, but against bigger enemies this isn't a problem, and even despite that, Venti makes up for it by dealing an insane amount of damage when he works. So when your burst groups up enemies, Venti's insane swirl damage will typically make up for whatever you're losing, but there is some negative synergy between Xiao and Venti. Next up, characters like Jean and Sayu can both work with Xiao, Jean being better and giving you a okay amount of particles and also offering you healing, but not offering as many particles, not offering you as much energy as someone like Sucrose or Venti. Because of that, while Jean works really well in a Xiao team, like let's say this one, where you're running 2 Geo characters, you typically want to run another battery, someone else who generates a lot of particles, someone like Albedo or Fischl, to help your Xiao get his burst back even faster. Next up, I want to say that the main character can actually work. Now, while they don't give you as much damage, the Anemo MC will reduce the Anemo resistance of enemies and give you a bit of particles, whereas the Electro MC, who is personally my favorite of the main characters, gives you an insane amount of energy for Xiao. In fact, through her talents and her 4th constellation, you can basically get Xiao's burst back with 0 ER. I'll play some footage on screen right now of my Xiao running literally 0 energy recharge, and I'm just going to show you guys how much energy I can get back with the Electro main character. While they aren't my favorite option for Xiao, they're definitely a viable one, especially if you don't have an Anemo battery. Lastly, regarding Kazuha, well, I typically recommend using Kazuha on another team, as he isn't as efficient at giving particles to your Xiao as someone like Sucrose, and can't buff your Xiao with Thrilling Tales. He does make up for it with having insane damage, so something I like to do is run like Xiao with Kazuha and Bennett, and just have my Kazuha also deal massive damage, but he is by no means needed with Xiao, and is typically not the best option for him, but it can work. Now for your healer characters, there are a few good ones, Jean being very good for Anemo particles and healing, and Sayu is like a budget version of that. Diona can also work wonders for a lot of of particles, a shield, and she can also run Favonius Warbow to give you even more energy. And lastly, Bennett, who is just usually the best healer in the game because he gives you an insane amount of attack, which is very, very good, especially for Xiao. But Xiao is not someone who is dependent on Bennett, and so you can run Bennett with Xiao if you have him available, but it is not needed. Now, other characters in this team for the last slot, there's actually a lot of options. While you've noticed the other two supports I picked here are 4 stars, the last character can also be a 4-star like Fischl, who's very good, offering you a lot of off-field damage and even a good amount of particles passively through her Oz. Someone like Shang Ling can even work in a specific sort of Xiao national team that's been going around recently. It's a bit weird to play, but it can work, as Shang Ling's Pyronado will spin around you, even when you're in the air. Other really good supports include someone like Zhongli, who's one of Xiao's best, and who's also getting a rerun soon, as his shield is just insane, having a lot of HP, and also reducing the resistance of whatever you're fighting by 20%. This is very good because anemo resistance is hard to decrease typically, and so having someone who can decrease it is very nice. Next up, I do feel like I have to talk about Albedo, because he's a character who got a lot of buffs recently with a new artifact set and weapon, making him just really good for Xiao as an off-field support who can just press E, use his elemental skill that will last on the field for about 30 seconds, which is huge, and it will deal passive damage from off-field and also generate some particles while your Xiao is in his burst, dealing damage. I also wanted to point out that a character like Mona can work with Xiao as well, because her burst offers you increased damage. As you can see, it will buff your Xiao's damage when you use that omen, and you can also give her a more supportive build with a catalyst like Thrilling Tales or Favonius, and potentially even a Noblesse set, just to give your Xiao more damage, or you can even focus on Mona herself and buff her burst. Xiao team with Sucrose, Bennett, and Zhongli, all of them buffing Xiao's damage greatly, allowing him to deal massive damage with every plunge. This is my favorite team overall, a double Geo, double Anemo comp. Really good, especially with the new buffs to like Albedo's build and just in general, giving Xiao some energy, and also double Resonance, Anemo, and Geo being a very good team. And lastly, 4-star only team that you can use is this one right here with Sucrose, Fischl, Diona, but obviously a lot of these characters, as I mentioned, are interchangeable, like using Bennett instead of Diona, or even another Anemo battery. With that being said, we're now going to get into a quick Xiao showcase, where I'm going to be using him in the current floor 12, and probably some other clips, but mainly in Abyss clear. Do keep in mind that this Abyss is Xiao's worst one so far, as the Rift Hounds are very bad for him, and also that I recorded this before the moon changed, where it's now favoring more mono Anemo teams, but I don't want to do a showcase in that because I don't typically recommend those teams other than for the specific moon. And obviously my Xiao is really high investment, like I've been farming him for over a year now. He's basically perfect artifact wise, but he is obviously C1 and only an R1 weapon, so not a whale on that front, but obviously really good artifacts as I've been farming him forever. With that being said, let's get into the showcase.
I will have order.
Live! Wait! Hear me! Lament! Worthless! Here!
And we got it! Can he do it? Who knows? Please, 2 plunges. 1, 2, let's go! And so yeah, that's about it. I really hope this guide did Xiao justice and answered all of your questions regarding how to play him and build him efficiently. Also, through the showcase, I wanted to show you guys basically what a year of grinding for a perfect character looked like, so I hope that was enjoyable. With that being said, I'm gonna go start working on my SHENHE guide, as I have been testing her since she came out extensively, and so I will release the guide once we know everything about her. With that being said, I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. If there's anything I want to add, it will be in a pinned comment as always. And with that being said, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.